I'm Dave.
And I'm Rob.
We've got the same dad.
Can we do my intro? It's way better.
Okay, what's your intro? I'm a Gen X.
And I'm a millennial.
We've got the same dad.
But we didn't meet until I was 16.
I don't even know what Gen X or millennial means, but this is the podcast where
We
share an album that
your
brother
should
No. Okay, welcome everybody. This month, I took a long, hard, deep breath and shared with Rob one of my favourite bands and albums of all time, despite knowing it's not everybody's cup of tea, and also not at all sure how you talk about an album that just runs for 44 minutes without a break. It is Thick as a Brick, Jethro Tull. Before we get into it, Rob, the usual question. When I said Jethro Tull and or Thick as a Brick, what did you know, think, or feel?
Well, I knew they were a prog band from the UK and therefore had kept a very wide berth as I'm opposed to all things prog and most things British. I did at one stage inherit a vinyl copy of an album which I think was called Too Old to Rock, Too Young to Die, which struck me as It struck me as a stupid title, and as a Stones fan, I was quite offended by it. I don't recall listening to it, and if I did, it clearly left zero impression on me. And then, about a year or two ago, I somehow found myself in possession of an album called War, because I bought it for a couple of quid, thinking it was an album by the band War, and was quite disappointed when I found it. It was some widdly nonsense, and sold it very quickly for less than half I paid for it.
Just to be clear, you don't mean War, you mean War Child would be the album in question.
It had WAR in big letters, and I was like, this will be some cool funk rock grooves, and it was not some cool funk rock grooves at all.
Cool rock of a different kind.
From one bargain bin to another.
Jethro Tull, golly, they are one of the kind of institutions of rock, formed in Blackpool. I'm not going to go through the various lineup changes, but essentially, Ian Anderson is the big person in Jethro Tull.
Is he the one that sings?
He's the one that sings and plays flute and writes the songs.
Oh, he doesn't play the guitar.
Well, he plays the acoustic guitar.
Yes.
But he actually learnt flute because he was aware of his limitations as a guitarist and didn't want to be, in his words, a third-rate guitarist in a fourth-rate band and wanted to do something a bit different.
So instead he became a second-rate guitarist in a fourth-rate band.
Oh, we'll come on to that. Their first album, was kind of bluesy, a little bit rocky, but slowly in the early 70s they had an album called Benefit, they had an album called Stand Up. I guess the important thing to say is after their first album, Mick Abrams left, and they recruited another guitarist called Martin Barr. So, fascinating fact for you, when they were looking for a new guitarist after their first album, this is about 1968, Mick Taylor, who was in John Miles' Blues Breakers and a year later was going to join the Rolling Stones, turned them down. They did audition him and they turned him down because he wanted to stay with John Miles' Blues Breakers. They also approached Tony Iommi, who was the original guitarist for Black Sabbath, I believe. Yeah. And they were really quite keen on him.
They might have been a way more interesting band in that case.
How could they be more interesting? But eventually they settled on Martin Barr. Had a couple of albums that just got them bigger and bigger. Benefit and Stand Up, kind of rocky, little bit bluesy, not really very prog. But, they were in the Isle of Wight Festival. They turned down playing Woodstock because Ian Anderson didn't want to get pigeonholed as being too hippie-ish. They then had a massive album, which is important to this one, called Aqualung.
Heard of that one?
Yeah, it's their classic rock. Have you ever heard it?
No.
You can't go to your grave not having heard Aqualung.
Yeah, you pitched me this one, Dave.
Well, because I think this one's more interesting. Ooh, is it? I don't know. It took me a long time to decide. There's quite a few songs on Aqualung about God and about relationship with God and organised religion. And because of that, the music critics at the time pigeonholed it as a prog album. This really annoyed Ian Anderson because he was like, it wasn't prog, we weren't doing prog, we're not prog. It was a collection of songs that some of which had the same theme. It really wasn't prog. And so in a slight fit of sort of humorous pique, he went, right, if you want a prog album, we're going to record our next album in 2 weeks and we'll do prog for you. And so Thick as a Brick was born. Without further ado, what did you think?
Oh, we're there, are we? I feel a little bit like a confused puppy who's being stared at by an owner with a treat. And I don't want to let you down. I want to wag my tail, but I need to be completely honest.
You loved it. You know you loved it.
I didn't love it, and I didn't hate it. I grew to enjoy parts of it a great deal, and other parts of it less. I think I spent a lot of time just trying to understand it. And therein lied the problem.
Right.
As pretty and glittery and technicolor as it seems on the surface, it's a bit like an Easter egg when you peel off the foil wrapper. You know, you realise it's just some cheap sugary shit inside.
Ah! Well, okay.
But we all like eating chocolate, Dave.
But we all like eating chocolate, so I think what you say would resonate with Ian Anderson a bit, and not a bit, and certainly not with the legions of fans that this album has. But let me just read you, because although it was written and created as a homage, if you like, but certainly with tongues firmly in cheek, it's become often it's in the top 10 prog albums of all time in the various lists, etc. But Ian Anderson himself, he was very clear that a lot of people didn't get the joke. As far as he was concerned, he said, I never thought it in any way parallel to something like The Who's Tommy or even the slightly mysterious Dark Side of the Moon. This was just whimsical, light-hearted fun. Although it had its serious moments embedded in there too, it was never a rock opera. It was just a bit of rambling, surreal British humour.
Okay, I for one am failing to see the funny side of this.
Ah! Okay.
But that's reassuring because I think the biggest charge that I would lay at this album is it isn't as clever as it thinks it is. Or perhaps I thought it was.
No, and it doesn't think it is. I mean, I think they're proud of it, but I think for me, the humour side is two sides. They certainly do prog, so the fact that they've got a cheesy drum solo about, 2/3 of the way forward, that's just them going, well, it's prog, isn't it? We do prog and we do a drum solo in prog. They nick all the formats of prog and kind of amplify it a bit too much. You perhaps don't get it on Spotify, but there was a whole kind of overblown album cover that they say they actually spent longer doing the album cover with this mock local newspaper story about a small boy winning a poetry competition, and it just goes off into this surreal fantasy stuff. So I guess if you're a prog fan, you know the movie's Aeroplane?
No.
Okay, so there's a whole load of movies called Airplane that take the mickey out of disaster movies. It's that. They've done the pastiche side of it.
So it's a bit like watching Spinal Tap, but never having heard AC/DC.
Yes, that's it. Yes, yeah.
Maybe the humour is falling on deaf ears in my case because I simply haven't heard enough stroke any prog.
Yeah.
So I thought they were probably being quite conceited and quite smug about their widdly cleverness.
Yeah, and they do have, a lot more albums of simple songs as well, so that it's definitely them with a little bit of tongue in cheek taking the piss out of this the monstrosity that prog can be.
It's interesting you talk about albums of songs because I feel like the more I listened to this record, the more I realised it wasn't this elaborate tapestry of different musical ideas woven together. Really, it was 6 or 7 different songs, which were kind of medley together, and then towards the end and in certain places, some of those riffs and ideas return. Sure. And again, some of the ways they're restrung together are quite intelligent, but you pitching me this directly as a response to Flying Lotus's You're Dead, well, I think the level of haberdashery is not quite comparable.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, well, there we disagree, because I think that prog can be created by someone having a very overall picture and filling in the blanks, and you don't see the gap. Classically, the 25-minute Genesis epic called Supper's Ready, which just flows and flows and flows and flows, even though you can get little sections of songs in it. I find, with the exception of one or two very jarring moments, I think they did a pretty good job of it, because actually the way it was evolved was, unlike their previous albums where Ian Anderson went in with songs and the band arranged them, with this one, he went in with, he said, some ideas every morning, and they did just sort of layer it every morning. So it was a more organic, evolutionary process. But it was only 2 weeks. And I think actually to have created all this lot in 2 weeks is quite staggering.
No, I would just say there's a lot of ideas here, but not all ideas were created equal. Maybe we should walk through it a little bit.
Sure.
So, and this is what I mean about songs. I think the first half especially, you can pretty much break it up into 4 distinct songs with a few kind of interlude bits, which sometimes are repeating and sometimes it just wants to plug the holes to remove the necessity for silence, you might say. But yeah, there's very much that pretty song where it's, you know, it's very much a verse chorus folky thing that happens, and then there's a little bit of a kind of minor key change around the 2.5 minute mark, and then 30 seconds later you get that frenetic on the beat riff, which I really enjoy that riff. But you know what, it comes back and a gack and a back, and you know, and then that, you know, that kind of has some vocals over it, and then it has a solo over it, and then it does change key and the solo carries on. And then it's an acoustic version of the same riff. So again, we're just dancing on one idea. But it's kind of just one instrumental interlude. And then around 5 minutes, we kind of go into this 2-chord thing.
Yeah.
Which, again, has a very distinct first chorus, with some epic guitar wankery in the middle. But again, it's very much one song that runs from just after 5 minutes to just after 10 minutes. Sure. You know, it's kind of a second complete song that's just been sandwiched between this cool riffy bit. And then there's a bit more of organ flute interlude bit. It gets all a bit barky in. And then around 12:40, you get the really quite... I find that the most cloying part of the record, and it goes on for at least 3 minutes in that iteration.
Right.
It just makes me think, Dave, of an American baseball game. I can imagine this being like what the organist is playing while they're waiting for the person to, you know, pitch the ball again. And it goes round and round and round and round and round and round and round. So it's not that many ideas. And then at 16:25, we get this reprise of the opening melody again, which is nice. It's like comforting. I like what they've done here, but with a different vocal melody and with a glockenspiel on top. I really like that. Then we get the riff again, but an acoustic version of it, which again is cool. But then it just goes round and round and round and round, and we get the dut bit, which led us into the riff. You know, 17, 18 minutes earlier.
Yeah.
And you get all the weird panning, which just sounds like they needed to somehow end the side in the house. The engineer just messed around with the panning and made it a bit psychedelic in the 60s. And it's kind of over. And you're like, well, that was a fun 21 minutes. But actually, there was about 3 songs in there and a bunch of interesting ideas linking them at times, but quite a lot of repetition as well. So I really enjoy that side. But the first time I heard it, you know, it's like, what's going on? Yeah. But having actually kind of sat down and listened to it more and more, it's one of those, as I say, the shiny wrapper is a little bit misleading with the contents almost.
Okay, so 2 things for me. One is, I think musically, I put this in the same bracket as Crime of the Century, Supertramp, which we did in the first episode.
Which I loved,
which you
for the
did
record.
love. And so I was interested what you thought about that, because for me, this and the Supertramp record very much passes the, and this is going to sound a little bit immodest, but you know, like a lot of music, like you play guitar very well, I play bad, but a lot of kind of verse, chorus. The thing that puts me off is I think, God, if I was just a 20% better guitarist, I could do that. Like, I get what you're doing. You know, I totally get, you're just going verse, chorus, bridge, la, la, la. And I'm not talented enough to do it, but I do get, and I'm bored by, therefore, sort of 80% of music, because I find it really dull and it just does that.
Likewise, yes.
And this and the Supertramp pass for me the I don't know how you fucking done that test. I find it's way beyond my musical imagination almost. They've created something new and different, and I think it's amazing. And I guess for me, for side 1, clearly no one's going to argue that there's 3 or 4 kind of clear songs in it. And there's 2 things I'd say about that. One is I find the joins really interesting. I think you can see that they've joined them together, but I find how they've done it really interesting.
Yeah, almost more interesting than the songs themselves, I would say.
Well, therein maybe is the difference, because I really love the bloody songs as well.
I've learned to enjoy the twee folkness of the first song, definitely.
Okay.
And I definitely enjoy the frenetic riff, which is almost a song, but it's kind of 90 seconds linking. And I really, really, really like the second song, like the kind of minor key 2-chord grungy guitar jerk-off
The
bit.
poet and the painter casting is poet and the painter.
But then I could live with the organ interlude for a minute or 2 less than it gets. And then I kind of, the last 5 minutes of the side where things come back and reprise, and I really enjoy that, and it's kind of building up somewhere. And it's almost a shame they had to end the side like that.
Yeah, fair enough. So, Thick as a Brick, side one. I think it's a monumental thing, and it's certainly monumental in prog archives. And I agree with your analysis. I just disagree with your emotional resonance to it.
Yeah, no, side one was frankly fantastic, and you're right to look at the last 5 minutes, because I think that's when it all kind of comes together, where those ideas do come back and new things come in, they weave in and out, and it kind of builds to quite a crescendo, and you wonder what's going to happen next. Which is why when one flips the metaphorical record, it's a little bit of a letdown. And it feels like they obviously wanted the side to end 4 minutes later, when it actually kind of ends after two kind of fake ends. But I don't know why they would have wanted to end those 5 minutes later, because they don't really do anything with those 4 minutes. It's just wankery. It's just noise. Maybe that would have worked at the end of a side, but as a side opener, and I know it should be listened to as a whole suite, and I appreciate respecting the vision of all that and everything, but it doesn't really work for me, and it may have been more sonically exciting in 1972 when those kind of experiments. This is pre-Dark Side of the Moon, right? So that probably sounded quite thrilling and quite high-tech. But yeah, it kind of feels like we're treading water for quite a while, and actually a lot of this second side treads water for me.
So, I totally agree with you for the first 7 minutes of side 2. I don't totally agree with you. But yeah, you're right. So it fades out with all that stuff, and it opens again with all and it doesn't really get going. It does the drum.
It stops, and it doesn't stop. You think it stopped. You think it
stopped.
It's building it's built up to a crescendo, and then it kind of just peters out.
And there's a lot of ting, ting, ting. Oh, we're going to get going, and we don't. Yeah.
And you think it's building to something. Yeah. And then it builds to something. There's a new riff around 5:23, which is like, doesn't really go anywhere, and then finally at 6:30 you get an actual new idea. I'd say the fourth real song, right? The kind of almost flamenco-y acoustic kind of, the Poor and the Wise Men, and the dawn creation, the king has begun, and fading heroes return, and it all gets very, very rousing.
Yeah.
And
do you believe in the day? That's when it starts again.
Yeah, I mean that goes on for a good 4 minutes.
Yeah.
Again, it's pretty much a kind of standalone song, but for me, that section is as good as the other two great songs on side one, if we're going to try and call them songs.
For quite a long time, I would fast forward that however long it is, 6 minutes of drum solo stuff.
Sacrilege!
I know.
What are the Tull message boards going to say to that? You're going to be crucified, Dave.
But there's and whether it was the bit where they were going like, come on, we really got to do prog, so let's do the wanky guitar solo and let's do some weird sounds and make it tough for a listen for a little while. I mean, there's bits in Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, another big Genesis album, side 3 of the 4. There's a lot of instrumentally kind of soundscape stuff which you either dig or don't, and feels a little bit like when people talk about being it's a hard listen, that's what they mean. You kind of got to steel yourself to get all the way through it, and I did certainly used to fast forward. I've come to accept it as part of the package, but I totally agree with you that for the first 6 or 7 minutes, that side feels like it's treading water. But then we come in with the quite nice, a little bit overblown, do you believe in the day thing? It's very, very overblown, but I quite kind of like it. And then we get the last, you've got about 10 minutes left, basically.
Yeah.
I'm just in prog heaven.
Oh.
Yeah. There's a few different melodies. There's some of the old melodies from side 1. There's instrumentals. There's things tied together. It goes all over the place. I've been listening for 30 years. I still can't quite make sense of it. I could probably do a spreadsheet and put some arrows and... Yeah.
I'm staring at my spreadsheet right now. So... At minute 11, we reach song 6A, which is a horse riding trot stroke twisted western. That doesn't really help. That's so interesting, Dave, because maybe it's just the fatigue of sitting through the preceding 32 minutes.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, from about a minute 11 onwards, I haven't been able to make head nor tail, nor really derive much enjoyment from the closing stretch. And it could just be fatigue.
Right.
Because I think there's too much repetition. There's not enough new things happening. So when they bring something old back, I'm like, oh, here we go again. And when it's something new, I'm probably too tired to take it in. So it all gets a little bit soupy for me at this point, to be honest.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to be bringing anything new or enough new to the table.
Okay.
I mean, I kind of detected kind of a new idea in this horse trot, which comes in again at 18, 12, 20. It's the anthemic end bit where we're waiting for the Superman to president or Robin save the day when it comes back in. Like... That's song 6 for me.
Yeah.
But it's so kind of convoluted because I say it kind of comes in at minute 11 and it comes back at minute 18, and between about 15:40, there's another kind of riff happening, and there's these fleeing solos. And at this point, I think it's just lost focus for me to be able to pay attention, which is probably to my discredit and its credit.
Mhm.
But yeah, I ceased deriving enjoyment around minute 11 of side 2.
Okay. Okay, so you've done the Do You Believe the Day and yeah. I'm going to get really nerdy here. So clearly, they always saw it as one suite of stuff, but it originally released on LP, so you had to flip it over. So I have a CD that talks about Thick as a Brick Part 1 and Thick as a Brick Part 2, where the timings you're talking about would make sense, because you've talked about minute 9, meaning minute 9 of track 2. But I also have a CD, I think one of the remasters, where it's all just one track. So my timings are all about 33 and 36 minutes, whereas yours at the moment are about 1 and 11 and 10 minutes of side 2. So that's just, there'll be nerdery around that as well.
Is this the nerdiest episode I've ever done?
Well, come on, it's about Jethro Tull. It was going to go that way. Yeah, I suppose all I can do is say, try putting the needle in the record 7 minutes into side 2 as a kickoff one day, and just without any of that, which again might be sacrilege, but I get that by that time you're a little bit punch drunk with all this.
You know what, Dave? I felt I'd be betraying the album's intent if I didn't do it in a single sitting.
Yeah.
So I've only listened to this album in a single sitting, and I've never skipped.
Well done, you prog chops. You're allowed in some prog forums. That's good. Well done. A couple of things I've got to say. One is, I've said that I'm in prog heaven, and I am for the second half of the second half, if you like. We've got to acknowledge that kind of patchwork thing. There is a really clunky one for me, it's 40 minutes and 37 seconds. It's when they go into the very last, So Come On All You Child Hero, they go into the real last kind of bit, and it's literally that you can see they've just gone, no idea what, and they even put a sound effect, some kind of sound effect on it, because they've done a lot of joining together, and it's the most clunky moment of prog tie-in ever on an album that's actually full of really good tie-ins. So that's a shame. Other than that, I mean, they even just throw in some strings at the end randomly, and you just go, yeah, go on, just stick in. You can probably, what the budget was, I don't know, but you could afford 20 minutes for an orchestra or some strings to do that, and you've done that, and you've thrown them in.
That makes sense to me. Yeah, there's definitely a sense of like a plate of spaghetti being thrown at the wall in this, and it's mainly spaghetti we've eaten already. It's almost like when you bought a CD single and you'd get maybe you get B-side or two and you'd get a remix or two, but often how the remixes of a CD single were vastly inferior, and there were just some hot for 5 seconds DJ putting some bad club beats on a song.
Yeah.
That was the kind of takeaway I was getting. A lot of the ideas we've heard before, but mashed up and kind of sold back in a slightly more synthetic form, which makes sense with all this splicing you're talking about. And I presume they were, actually splicing physical tape.
That's why You're Dead did twig me to do this, is because clearly that's an album where they had the benefit of laptops and all of that sophisticated digital stuff where you can just do that cut and paste very easily. Let's remember they did this in 2 weeks, and whatever editing went on, and they have done it live all the way through, but whatever editing went on, it was people with knives and bits of sellotape. So as a feat of engineering, as you say, it is an amazing thing.
Okay, Dave, I have a big question. We haven't talked about the lyrics at all. There's so much imagery bubbling along, and honestly, it's the kind of medieval, werewolfy, Middle England BS that gives me a big rubbery one. So, what's it all about anyway?
Yeah.
And who the hell is Biggles?
So, what's it all about? If you really want to know, there are people on the internet, many, many, many people have done many, many essays and blogs taking it line by line. And
oh, I bet they have.
You've got to do the whole not take it too seriously thing again with this, because Ian Anderson's very clear that his tongue was very much in his cheek. But he also gave himself a get out, because obviously some of the imagery is overblown and a little bit high school poetry. He said, and it is, it's in the album cover, he wrote this as like a 12-year-old's, I can't remember, 9-year-old's poem. Okay, so it's supposed to be a schoolboy's kind of writing anyway.
Thus the album cover.
Yeah. And what is it about? There are some broad themes which are, it's certainly about class. There's certainly class stuff in there. It's certainly about battle of the generations. So it's a young man looking at the world out there and all the old people being down on him. And it's certainly about being free and living your own life and making your own decisions.
I can see why it resonated with you.
Yeah. And the key thing about your wise men don't know how it feels to be thick as a brick. There's all these clever people telling you how you live your life, and they don't understand us thickos world and how we make decisions and what we do. But it's about making your own decisions. And then the imagery, and what I love about it, but probably drives people mad, is it's so English. Like, some of the imagery is so English. And this is the point to remind ourselves. Guess what number this went to? Billboard chart in the USA.
It didn't chart?
Number 1.
Fuck.
Yeah. So, for nothing else, you go, what the actual fuck?
That says a lot about what I dislike about the album, because it's kind of peddling this kind of cartoonish, medieval, villagey knights and castles, and it's got a bit of a Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing going on it, which puts me off more than the word prog itself. Okay. But that's exactly the kind of horseshit that an American audience, especially in 1972, might just buy into. It's exoticizing their own Englishness. And while I'm on a rant, I would say, I'm sorry, it feels a little bit disingenuous of this chap Ian to claim that he tossed it off and was writing as a 9-year-old and all the rest of it, because it clearly is a very sophisticated, very nuanced, very detailed work of art that required a huge amount of human effort to create. So I don't quite believe this, and this maybe brings me on to my next question. But first of all, you need to tell me who the hell Biggles is.
So there's a lot of English imagery in it and stuff the Americans wouldn't know, and I like all that about it. But my favourite line, though, in the whole thing is, with the rings upon your fingers and your downy little sideys. Every time that makes me smile. It just conjures up that Dickensian upper-class idiot with little downy sideys. I love that. Biggles? You've never read Biggles by Captain W.E. Johns?
Who?
Okay, so Biggles...
I'm a millennial, Dave.
Okay. So, I'm too old for Biggles. So think pre-James Bond, set of kids' books, and all the books are like, Biggles does America, and Biggles rides again, and Biggles does this, and Biggles does that. And he was in charge of a little group of men and planes, and did exciting things, certainly in the Second World War ones, against the Germans. And he was one of those sets of literature for boys in England that was very patriotic, very upper class talking to lower class about how you do your sense of responsibility to God and the King. So think Baden-Powell and the Scout movement, but captured in a set of fictional books about someone flying around shooting Nazis.
Sounds absolutely horrible.
So he's referencing that, as well as Superman and teaching your kids to play Monopoly, which I find hilarious as well. And I love the line also, will you make your will and testament, will you join your local government? That's just like, couldn't be anything other than kind of Southern England rubbish. So I love all those twee bits, but I can see how that just turns people off.
Yeah, so how representative is this album of the rest of their work?
I would say there's roughly 4 periods of Jethro Tull. There's pre-Thick as a Brick, where it's kind of songs, complex songs, but songs, rock, blues, bit of jazz, bit of classical stuff in there. Done. This and a passion play. So they went on to do another album after this. It's never been as big, but it's another 40-minute long song called a passion play, which is I've actually really like, but generally thought of as a bit of a Thick of the Brick light. They then did War Child, Minstrel in the Gallery, and Too Old to Rock and Roll, Too Young to Die, which variously people like them or don't. I think Minstrel in the Gallery is really strong, which kind of mix together all of the above. There's a few long songs, some shorter ones. It's kind of all their classic era stuff of the 70s. So that's that. Then, though, in the late 70s, just as they were perhaps losing steam a little bit, they did 3 folk rock albums, or folk prog rock albums. So they really reinvented themselves in the late 70s. Still quite complex arrangement stuff, but very, very folky. And they started being friendly with Fairport Convention, the big UK folk band. Dave Pegg, the bassist from Fairport Convention, started playing with them. And again, though, all this time, they just seem to get bigger and bigger and bigger in the States, especially. I mean, the Rolling Stones, I think 76, said, are Jethro Tull the biggest band in the world? It was that level. By doing this kind of weird Elizabethan Baroque poppy rock folk stuff. So from 69 to 80, they did an album a year where they'd done songs albums, prog albums, and folk rock albums, if you like. They then had a disastrous 80s like everybody else. Hey, we've done it before. What happened? All a bit synthy. There's an album called Under Wraps, which gets 1 star everywhere, and I've tried to get on with it, and I can't. Just crashed into that 80s technology, electronic sound, couldn't do it, failed, bombed miserably. But I've got to talk about the album Crest of a Knave in 1987. Have you heard about Crest of a Knave?
I don't know a nugget about No Knave.
So they had a massive return to form in the late 80s with an album called Crest of a Knave. Ironically, some of it, when you hear what I'm about to say, was with a drum machine. It was a bit stripped down, a bit Dire Straitsy, actually. So there was kind of complexity, but it was more straight ahead rock. It was pretty good. I've enjoyed it. In 1989, Jethro Tull and Metallica's And Justice for All were nominated for the Best Hard Rock Metal Performance at the Grammys. Jethro Tull didn't even go because nobody was expecting them to win. And they won it for Best Heavy Metals Album. It's not even that fucking heavy. The announcement was made, everyone was like, what? And they were like, and then in the next day, their record company brilliantly took out an advert with a picture of a flute going, the flute is a heavy metal instrument. To Metallica's credit, they saw the funny side. When they eventually did win the Grammy in 1992, their singer joked or said, first thing we're going to do is to thank Jethro Tull for not putting out an album this year. So they kind of they praised it. But yeah, so that's their kind of other but major thing in musical history, and no doubt did their sales no harm at all. So they had that brief renaissance, and then since then have released quite a lot of albums, none of which I've particularly got on with. Rocker Island I had, Roots to Branches I've got. I find them a bit, sorry for the people that do like a bit middle of the road rock. They weren't great. But the thing we have to say to finish the story is in 2012, after 42 years of playing together, essentially Ian Anderson sacked Martin Barr, the guitarist. And it was like just decided didn't want to do that anymore. No one quite knows why. Martin Barr doesn't himself. So there's now Martin Barr's touring brackets Jethro Tull band, and there's been various names of the Ian Anderson touring Jethro Tull band and da 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 da. The other thing I have to mention, shortly after Martin Barr was kicked out, Ian Anderson finally, after years of being asked to, wrote and recorded and released Thick as a Brick 2.
Big question, is it any good?
I haven't listened to it.
And you say this is one of your favourite albums.
That's what I can't bring myself. It's a massive mental block. I haven't even read reviews. I've got to get over myself. I love Thick as a Brick. It's probably one of my top 10 albums. And it's a real fear. I get the fear, even talking to you now about Thick as a Brick 2. I've got the fear over it. I've got to get out there and listen to it. I've got to at some point. Can you listen to it for me and tell me what it's like? I don't know, somebody.
Sure.
I really just need to, but I've never been. I've had it up on Spotify several times, and I've never been able to hit play. I've just got, oh no, can't do it. I don't know what that says, but at some point I've got to get over myself and listen to Thick as a Brick too.
You have. Dave, that was an incredibly long, incredibly detailed trail through the Tull. Long story short, I enjoyed a lot of this album. Where should I go next?
Please listen to Aqualung. It's such a gold standard rock record that it's kind of almost part of your history of the world type thing. On top of that, you see, Minstrel in the Gallery is the one that I really like because it's quite similar to this world. But you would probably enjoy Stand Up because I think it's probably less, inverted commas, up itself and more direct.
Okay, Dave, you just said this was one of your top 10 albums, which to me is slightly boggling. You've got to tell me the story. When and how did you come across Tull, and especially this album, and what did it mean to you?
So I came across Tull because I bought the best of and I knew they were around. I then bought Passion Play. I very, very quickly bought all the classic early 70s stuff. So I've, in from 14 to 15, I bought 2 Ultra Rock and Roll, Minstrel in the Gallery, War Child, Passion Play. And for a long time, actually, a Passion Play was my favourite. I don't know why. It's almost kind of monastic and monk-like, some of the chanting in it. But Thick as a Brick, like the quality that it is, the kind of quality shines through. So it is the one that, if I'm in a Tull mood, goes on. And I'm not, to be fair, I'm not 14 anymore. I'm not in a Tull mood that often, but like 2 or 3 times a year, I'll be in a Tull mood. And to be fair, I probably do just listen to part 1, the first half, and that's my Tull done, because that has been a constant friend and companion for the best part of 40 years now. So, having listened to this, can you imagine a world, and if you did, where you had to listen to it again, where do you think the ideal place to listen to this is?
The first time I dialed it was actually walking along that nice, wide, calm river, just down the road from your idyllic rural countryside home. And the album will forever be intertwined because it's so British and so oldie-worldy. I think those little thatched buildings and all the rustic nature and the grey skies, the sun shining through was totally appropriate. And I would, love to pay you another visit and walk along that river one day, and I might dial that album again for old time's sake.
Fantastic. I can't top that because I think Jethro Tull do bring up this bucolic Old England type thing. So a nice walk in the countryside. The only thing I think is after it, once you've taken your headphones off, you then got to go for a pint and a packet of peanuts in a really nice pub with an open fire. Finally, have pitched you Jethro Tull. You didn't hate it. So that's good. What on earth are you going to pitch me in response to that?
Well, after that epic indulgence, I am digging into the lowest of the bottom drawers and pulling out the guiltiest of guilty pleasures. I'm not even sure if I like this anymore, but there's an album that I fell in love with as a wee lad, one of the first albums I ever heard, and I was obsessed with it, and it's turning 30 this summer. So consider this revenge. I'm really eager to revisit it, and I'm going to make you go on a journey with me, Dave. You're going to be listening to Bon Sodding Jovi these days. Bring it on.
I look forward to it massively. Thank you very much, Rob. And thanks for listening if you have been. Bye.